My name is Naomi Carter, and I was 34 years old the afternoon my parents handed me a laminated sheet titled Family Expectations After Marriage. It wasn't a joke. There were 12 rules. Number 1 said my husband would spend every Christmas with my family. Number 4 said any children we had would carry my father's family traditions without outside influence. Number 7 said we would never move farther than 30 miles from my parents unless they approved it first. Number 11 said all major financial decisions would be discussed with my parents because, in my mother's words, young couples make emotional mistakes. I remember reading every line twice because my brain refused to believe anyone could write those words, print them, laminate them, and present them with a smile. Then my mother slid a pen across the dining table. "Sign it now," she said. I looked at my fiancé. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't argue. He simply reached across the table, picked up the paper, read every single line from top to bottom, placed it back exactly where she'd left it, and quietly said one word. No. The room went silent, not awkward silent, the kind of silence where everyone suddenly realizes life has just split into two different futures. My father leaned back in his chair, as though someone had insulted his entire bloodline. My mother blinked once, twice. Then she smiled, not because she was happy, because she thought she had already won. She believed I would choose them. She had spent my entire life making sure I always did. Before I tell you how one word unraveled nearly 30 years of control, take a second to like the video if stories about quiet justice are your favorite. And tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how many different places these stories reach. To understand why my parents believed they could write rules for another adult's marriage, you have to understand the house where I grew up. We weren't wealthy. We were organized. There is a difference. Every cabinet in our home had labels. Every family photograph was dated on the back. Every birthday gift had a notebook entry recording who gave what and how much it cost. My mother, Linda Carter, believed that nothing valuable should ever be forgotten. Unfortunately, she included favors. If someone helped you once, you owed them. If they helped you twice, you belonged to them. She never used the word debt. She preferred the word gratitude. But gratitude in our house always came with monthly payments. My father, Dennis, worked as a regional sales manager for an office supply company. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cruel. He simply believed keeping peace was more important than telling the truth. When arguments started, he'd straighten the sleeves of his shirt over and over again. That was his version of disappearing. I learned to watch his cuffs the way other children watched traffic lights. If he adjusted them once, he was uncomfortable. Twice, he agreed with Mom. 3 times, I knew I was on my own. I was an only child. People assume only children receive all the attention. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they receive all the expectations instead. Every report card became a family discussion. Every promotion became proof my parents had raised me correctly. Every achievement belonged to all 3 of us. Failures, however, those were mine alone. By the time I was 25, I had become an operations coordinator for a regional logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. I loved logistics because freight doesn't care about feelings. A shipment either arrives or it doesn't. A signature either exists or it doesn't. The paperwork always tells the truth eventually. That idea stayed with me longer than I realized. I met my future husband because of a scheduling mistake. His name was Ethan Brooks. He owned a small commercial appliance repair company with 6 technicians and 3 service vans. One Tuesday morning, one of our warehouse refrigeration units failed. The dispatch software assigned the wrong repair company. Instead of canceling the order and waiting another day, Ethan showed up anyway. "I'm already here," He shrugged. If I can fix it, somebody gets cold storage back today. There wasn't anything dramatic about him. His jeans had grease stains. His boots had cracked soles. He drank terrible gas station coffee without complaining. But he had a habit that caught my attention. Whenever one of his employees made a mistake, he corrected the problem before discussing who caused it. The equipment doesn't care whose fault it is. He'd say, it just needs fixing. I realized after a few months, people weren't afraid of disappointing Ethan. They were afraid of disappointing themselves. There's a difference. Our first date lasted nearly 4 hours because we accidentally stayed until a small diner closed. He talked about rebuilding old motorcycles with his grandfather. I talked about freight routing. Neither of us pretended to be more interesting than we really were. Halfway through dinner, he admitted something. My business is stable, he said, but it's not impressive. I laughed. I wasn't shopping for impressive. He smiled. Good. That was the moment I stopped interviewing him in my head. My parents met Ethan 6 months later. Mother asked exactly 11 questions. None of them were about whether he was kind. Instead, how many employees? How much debt? Do you own the building? Do you lease the vans? What are your 5-year expansion plans? She treated dinner like a bank loan application. Ethan answered every question politely. Then he asked one of his own, "What would you like to know about me besides work?" My mother looked genuinely confused. As a husband, he clarified. She waved her hand dismissively. If your career is successful, the rest usually follows. I saw something flicker across Ethan's face. Not anger, recognition. Later, driving home, he asked quietly, "Has it always been like that?" I kept my eyes on the road. Pretty much. And you're okay with it? I thought about answering. Instead, I changed the subject. Looking back, silence was how I participated in my own control. I simply didn't know it yet. The proposal happened 1 year later beside a quiet lake where we'd gone camping almost every autumn. There wasn't a photographer, no audience, no hidden violinist, just Ethan kneeling in damp grass, holding a ring that was slightly too big because he guessed my size. I can't promise perfect, he said, but I can promise we're always on the same side. I said yes before he finished speaking. For about 3 weeks, life was peaceful. Then my mother called. We should discuss expectations before the wedding. I assumed she meant guest lists, flowers, maybe seating arrangements. Instead, she invited us to dinner, printed 12 rules, laminated them, and brought a pen. That afternoon, she smiled as though she were presenting a generous gift. "You'll appreciate structure later," she said. I remember looking down at the paper, not because I was considering signing it, because I couldn't understand how someone could mistake control for love. Then Ethan read the final rule, Rule 12. In the event of serious marital disagreement, final family guidance will come from Naomi's parents. He placed the paper neatly back on the table, looked directly at my mother, and softly said, "No." My mother stared at Ethan for several seconds, not offended, confused, as though the word itself had been spoken incorrectly. "I'm sorry?" she asked. Ethan's voice never changed. "No." He rested one hand lightly on the edge of the table. "We won't be signing this." My mother laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the kind adults use when they think someone younger simply hasn't understood. "I don't believe you read it carefully." I did. It's only meant to help. It isn't help. He tapped the laminated page with one finger. It's ownership. My father's hand immediately found the cuff of his left sleeve. One adjustment, then another. I felt my stomach tighten. I already knew what that meant. My mother folded her hands together. "You've only known Naomi for a year." "I have. We've known her for 34. You raised her." Exactly. And now she's building a life with me. The room grew strangely quiet, not because anyone had run out of words, because no one in my family had ever calmly disagreed with my mother before. People either surrendered or shouted. Ethan did neither. He simply refused. My mother looked at me instead. Naomi, that one word carried decades of expectation. Fix this. Choose correctly. Make him apologize. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For most of my life, my parents had spoken first. I'd gotten used to translating my own feelings after theirs. Before I could answer, my father finally spoke. It isn't unreasonable to ask children to stay close. Ethan nodded. It's reasonable to hope. He slid the laminated paper back toward them. It's unreasonable to require. Mother's smile disappeared. You seem to misunderstand how this family works. No, he answered gently. I understand exactly how it works. That sentence landed harder than if he'd raised his voice. Because it was true. Dinner ended 20 minutes later. No one mentioned dessert. No one hugged goodbye. As we drove home, neither of us spoke for almost 15 minutes. Finally, I whispered, I'm sorry. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. For what? My family. He reached across the center console and squeezed my hand. They're your family. Another pause. They aren't your responsibility. I wish I could tell you those words changed everything. They didn't. Control that has been growing for decades doesn't disappear during one car ride. It unravels slowly, like a knot you don't even realize you're still holding. The wedding planning became a battlefield disguised as etiquette. Every week brought another suggestion that somehow wasn't a suggestion. My mother wanted to approve the guest list, then the venue, then the caterer, then our honeymoon destination. When we chose a small, lakeside venue instead of the country club she'd already shown her friends, she sighed dramatically. I suppose appearances don't matter anymore. When Ethan and I decided to write our own vows instead of repeating the traditional ones she had printed for us, she frowned. Marriage isn't the place for creativity. Everything became a lesson. Everything became a correction. If I picked blue flowers, white would have been more elegant. If Ethan chose barbecue for the rehearsal dinner, salmon would have looked more successful. Even the invitations weren't safe. She held one in her hand and frowned. Why is Ethan's name printed first? Because that's what we chose. She looked genuinely disappointed. I raised you to think about these things. I smiled politely. Inside, I felt 10 years old again. If you've ever found yourself apologizing for choices that didn't actually hurt anyone, leave a comment below. Sometimes hearing someone else say, I've lived that too, matters more than advice ever could. 3 weeks before the wedding, something happened that I didn't fully appreciate until much later. My mother asked me to stop by the house alone. I have something for you. When I arrived, she handed me a thick 3-ring binder. Tabs divided it into sections. Monthly budget, holiday schedule, future children, retirement planning, conflict resolution. I blinked. You made us a manual? It's for you. She smiled proudly. So you don't make unnecessary mistakes. I flipped through the pages. There were sample grocery budgets, recommended bedtime routines for children we didn't even have, suggested names, preferred schools, church attendance expectations, even instructions for how often grandparents should babysit. One section stopped me completely. Financial transparency. Every quarter, married couples should disclose savings, investments, and major purchases to immediate parents for accountability. I looked up slowly. You expect us to tell you how much money we have. We're family. That's private. She tilted her head. Privacy creates distance. No, I thought. Control creates distance. I just wasn't brave enough to say it yet. Instead, I took the binder home. Not because I intended to follow it, because like always, I kept paperwork. Old habits survive long after you stop believing in them. Our wedding day arrived under bright September skies. Everything was simple, exactly how Ethan and I wanted it. About 80 guests, a small string quartet, good food, bad dancing, perfect. The ceremony itself lasted less than 20 minutes. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ethan smiled the same way he had at the lake, quietly, as though happiness didn't need witnesses to become real. For a few hours, everything felt normal. Then the reception started. Halfway through dinner, my mother stood. She tapped her wine glass with a spoon. I'd like to offer a few words. I assumed she'd tell childhood stories. Embarrass me a little. Thank everyone for coming. Instead, she pulled a folded paper from her purse. My greatest hope, she announced, is that this marriage remains grounded in the values Naomi was raised with. Several guests smiled politely. Then she continued, we all know marriage succeeds best when young couples continue listening to experienced family. The room became noticeably quieter, and I know Ethan will remember that our family has always guided Naomi well. I saw Ethan set his fork down, not aggressively, carefully. My mother wasn't making a toast. She was making an announcement, one she believed everyone would applaud. When she finished, scattered clapping followed, mostly out of confusion. Then Ethan stood. He wasn't supposed to speak. There wasn't another speech scheduled. He lifted his glass. I'd like to thank Linda and Dennis. Every head turned toward him. They raised a woman who's thoughtful. He looked at me, kind, honest, and stronger than she realizes. My mother's smile returned for exactly 3 seconds. Then Ethan continued, but I also want to make one promise. His voice remained calm. The advice we'll treasure will always be welcome. He paused. The decisions, he slipped his hand into mine, will always belong to the two people wearing these rings. Silence, not hostile, heavy. I didn't marry into another management team. A nervous laugh escaped someone near the back. I married Naomi. He smiled, and that's already more than enough. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was real. People stood. Someone whistled. Even the band members clapped. Across the room. My mother didn't. She simply sat very still, watching control slip away in front of 80 witnesses. She never forgave Ethan for that speech. At the time, I thought it was because he'd embarrassed her. Years later, I realized something else. He hadn't embarrassed her. He'd done something much worse. He'd shown everyone that saying no didn't end the world. And once people see that, they begin wondering what else they've been afraid to refuse. The first month of marriage was so peaceful that I almost convinced myself the worst was behind us. I should have known better. Control rarely disappears. It usually changes tactics. My mother stopped giving instructions directly. Instead, she started asking questions that sounded harmless. What did you two do this weekend? Have you opened a joint bank account yet? Who's handling the bills? How much is Ethan charging for commercial service calls these days? At first, I answered automatically. Then I noticed something. Every conversation ended with advice. If we said we'd spent the weekend painting our guest room, she'd tell us which color would have increased resale value. If we mentioned eating out, she'd calculate how much money we were wasting. If I talked about working late, she'd remind me that wives shouldn't let careers become distractions. Nothing was ever simply conversation. Everything became an audit. Ethan noticed before I did. One evening, he watched me hang up after another 40-minute phone call. You okay? I think so. You don't sound convinced. I shrugged. She's just, Mom. He waited. One thing about Ethan, he never rushed silence. Finally, he asked, "Do you feel better after talking to her?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because I couldn't remember the last time the answer had been yes. About 6 weeks after our wedding, my parents invited themselves over for dinner. Not asked, announced. "We'll be there around 6, my mother said. "We'd like to see how you've settled in." I spent the entire afternoon cleaning, not because the house was messy, because some part of me was still trying to earn approval that had never really been available. Ethan came home carrying takeout containers. "I thought we'd make tonight easy. My parents are coming." "I know. They'll expect a home-cooked meal." He smiled. "They're getting excellent Thai food." I almost laughed. Almost. At 6 o'clock sharp, they arrived. My mother stepped inside, carrying a small notebook. I wish I were exaggerating. She actually carried a notebook. She walked slowly through the living room. "You moved the bookshelf." "Yes. The sofa used to face the window. We like it this way." She made a tiny note, not even pretending to hide it. I stared. "What are you writing?" "Oh, just things we can improve." Ethan looked at the notebook, then at me. He didn't say a word. Dinner itself wasn't terrible. Until dessert. My mother placed the notebook on the table and smiled. "I've made a few observations." My stomach dropped. Observation number 1. The guest room should become a nursery before it fills with unnecessary furniture. Observation number 2. The garage needed better organization. Observation number 3. Our emergency savings should be kept in the same bank as theirs because family finances are stronger together. Observation number 4. Ethan's business should hire my cousin Trevor as office manager. Trevor had never managed anything in his life. He'd been fired from 3 different jobs in 2 years. Observation number 5. This one changed everything. "I think," my mother said pleasantly, "it's time we become authorized users on your emergency accounts." I blinked. "I'm sorry, in case something happens." My father nodded, as though this were perfectly normal. "If either of you were hospitalized." Mother continued, "Someone responsible should have access." I looked at Ethan. He looked surprisingly calm. "Responsible." Mother smiled. "Parents." Ethan folded his napkin carefully. "I have a question." "Of course." "If Naomi's parents become authorized on our accounts." He paused. "Do my parents become authorized on yours?" My mother frowned. "That's different." "How?" "We're discussing you." "No." He smiled politely. "We're discussing principles." Silence. My father adjusted both sleeves. Twice. Then a third time. I hadn't seen him do that since I was in college. Mother leaned forward. "You seem uncomfortable with family." "I love family." "Then why resist?" "Because love doesn't require passwords." Nobody spoke. The air itself felt heavy. Then my mother laughed softly. "You're taking everything so personally." Ethan nodded once. "I am." "Why?" "Because you're talking about my marriage." Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, my mother pushed the notebook toward me. "Keep this. There are some very useful suggestions." I looked down at the pages. Every item had a small checkbox beside it, as though she expected progress reports. I closed the notebook. "I don't think we'll need it." Her smile froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," my voice surprised even me, "our home isn't a project." She looked at my father, then back at me. "Naomi." "No." It slipped out before I could second-guess myself. One small word, exactly the same word Ethan had spoken weeks earlier. For a second, my mother actually looked startled, as though she'd heard my voice for the first time. If you've ever realized you were borrowing someone else's courage until it slowly became your own, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes strength is contagious. Dinner ended early. Very early. The next morning, My phone exploded. Texts, voicemails, emails, even messages through relatives. My aunt called first. I heard you threw your parents out. I didn't. You refused their help. It wasn't help. My cousin Melissa texted, your mom was only trying to protect you. An uncle I'd spoken to maybe twice in 5 years wrote, marriage changes people. Don't forget who raised you. By lunchtime, I understood exactly what had happened. The story had already been rewritten, not by me, by my mother. Again, only this time, I wasn't 25 anymore, and unlike before, I had started keeping more than paperwork. I had started keeping perspective. That afternoon, Ethan came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table. The notebook lay open beside my laptop. He sat across from me. You've been reading it? I nodded, not for the reasons she hoped. I turned the notebook around. Each page contained handwritten dates, different ink colors, different pens, different months. Some notes had clearly been added long before our wedding. One page caught my attention. At the bottom, written in blue ink months earlier, was a sentence that made my heart stop. After marriage, financial visibility must be established before significant assets accumulate. I read it twice, then a third time. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan leaned closer. What is it? I pointed to the sentence. He read it. His expression changed. Not to anger, recognition. They've been planning this for a long time. I nodded. This wasn't about traditions. It wasn't about family values. It wasn't even about staying close. It was about access. Access to our decisions, our home, our future, and eventually our money. I closed the notebook carefully, the way I always handled important documents, because something deep inside me whispered a thought I couldn't yet prove. This notebook wasn't advice. It was evidence that I didn't tell my mother I'd noticed the sentence. Not yet. People reveal far more when they think you haven't caught on. That was something I'd learned from years in logistics. If a shipment disappeared, the paperwork rarely lied. You didn't accuse someone first. You watched. You compared dates. You checked signatures. Eventually, the missing piece usually walked into the light by itself. So I put the notebook into the same filing cabinet where I kept tax returns, warranties, insurance papers, and our mortgage documents. Ethan smiled when he saw me slide it into a labeled folder. Evidence. Maybe. Good. He kissed my forehead. I'd rather have it and not need it. For nearly 3 months, everything became strangely quiet. My mother still called, still texted, still sent articles about marriage, budgeting, and parenting despite the fact that we didn't even have children. But she stopped asking for meetings, stopped bringing notebooks, stopped mentioning rules. It almost looked like she'd accepted our boundaries. Almost. Then, in late January, Ethan's business landed the largest commercial contract it had ever signed. A regional grocery chain awarded his company a 3-year maintenance agreement covering 22 stores across central Ohio. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to hire 4 more technicians, enough to replace 2 aging service vans, enough that our local business journal published a short article with Ethan's picture beside one of the new trucks. The article wasn't dramatic, just a photograph, a quote, a paragraph about steady growth. I didn't think much of it. My mother did. She called less than 24 hours after it was published. I saw Ethan in the paper. Yeah. How wonderful. There was something unusually cheerful about her voice. I've always believed he had potential. I almost laughed. This was the same woman who'd once asked if appliance repair was really a long-term profession. Now she sounded proud. She asked about the contract, the new employees, future expansion. Then she casually asked, "So, Are you two thinking about buying a bigger house now? No. Really? We like this one. Oh. A tiny pause. I only wondered because successful people usually upgrade. Successful people. Not happy people. Not comfortable people. Successful. The conversation stayed with me long after I hung up. A week later, my father called. That alone was unusual. He rarely phoned unless my mother was sitting beside him. Hi, sweetheart. His voice sounded nervous. Hi, Dad. I was wondering. He hesitated. Could we have lunch? Just us. Yes. I agreed. Partly because I missed him. Partly because I was curious. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. He arrived 10 minutes early, still wearing the same silver wristwatch he'd owned since I was a teenager, still smoothing the sleeves of his shirt whenever he became uncomfortable. Some habits never leave. We ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, he cleared his throat. Your mother means well. There it was. I nodded slowly. I know she thinks she does. He stared into his cup. She's worried. About what? You. I'm 34. I know. Another pause. She thinks husbands sometimes change after they're financially secure. I blinked. What? He nodded uneasily. She's afraid Ethan might begin controlling things. For a moment, I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Control? The only person who had ever tried to control my marriage wasn't sitting across from me. She was sitting at home. Dad continued carefully. She believes parents should remain involved. Involved? I repeated. Or in charge? He didn't answer. Instead, his fingers found his sleeves again. One adjustment. 2. 3. The same signal I'd watched since childhood. I leaned forward. Dad. He looked up. Do you agree with her? His mouth opened. Closed. Then, finally, I don't know anymore. It was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in years. The real turning point came 2 months later. It was a Saturday morning. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen windows while Ethan and I assembled new shelving for the garage. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Your mom. He handed it to me. Instead of calling me, she'd called him. I answered. Hi, Mom. Oh. She sounded disappointed. I meant to speak with Ethan. About. I have a business opportunity. I frowned. For Ethan? Yes. I switched the phone to speaker. He's right here. Her voice brightened instantly. Ethan, darling. He looked at me with raised eyebrows. This was new. I'd been talking with Trevor. Of course. He needs a fresh start. I closed my eyes. Mother continued. We think becoming operations manager at your company would be perfect. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he asked, does Trevor have commercial refrigeration experience? No. Fleet management? No. Dispatch? No. Accounting? No. She sounded almost offended by the questions. He learns quickly. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm sure he does. So, I'm afraid we don't have an operations manager position. You could create one. No. The same word. Calm. Steady. No. Mother laughed awkwardly. Surely family deserves consideration. They do. And my employees deserve fairness. Silence. I won't ask experienced people to compete with someone's cousin. Her voice cooled noticeably. I thought family came first. It does. He smiled. My wife comes first. Click. She hung up. No goodbye. Nothing. Ethan looked at the silent phone for a moment, then set it back on the workbench. I have a feeling. He said quietly, that isn't over. Neither did I, because this wasn't really about Trevor. It wasn't about a job. It wasn't even about family. It was another test, another attempt to see whether the word no still meant no. And somewhere deep down, I was beginning to suspect my mother wasn't just trying to influence our life anymore. She was trying to secure a permanent place inside it before something much bigger happened. I just didn't know what that something was yet. 3 days after the phone call about Trevor, my mother behaved as though nothing had happened. She sent me a recipe, then a picture of flowers blooming in her backyard, then an article titled 5 Habits of Financially Successful Families. No mention of Trevor, no apology, no acknowledgement that she tried to pressure Ethan into hiring someone completely unqualified. That was another one of her habits. If something didn't go her way, she simply skipped over it and started a new conversation, as though the previous one had never existed. For years, that trick had worked on me. Not anymore. Spring arrived early that year. Ethan's company kept growing one contract at a time. Nothing flashy, no investors, no television interviews, just steady work. A hospital signed a maintenance agreement, then 2 retirement communities, then a manufacturing plant. Every Friday afternoon, Ethan sat at our kitchen table with invoices spread around him, not because he had to, because he wanted to understand every dollar entering or leaving the business. Money tells stories. He'd say, you just have to read them carefully. I smiled every time he said it. It sounded surprisingly similar to the way I viewed shipping records. Different industries. Same principle. Paper has a memory. People don't. One evening, while I was paying household bills online, my phone buzzed. Mom. I answered. Hi. I've been thinking. Dangerous words. About what? You two should create a family trust. I stared at the laptop screen. A trust? Yes. It protects future wealth. We don't have future wealth. You might. Her answer came too quickly. I frowned. What makes you think that? Oh. She hesitated. I just believe Ethan's company could become quite valuable. That sentence stayed with me. She'd never believed in Ethan. Not until recently. Now she spoke about his business as though she'd invested in it herself. Then she added something even stranger. I've already spoken with someone, a financial planner. I sat upright. You discussed our finances with a financial planner? Only generally. Without asking us. I was gathering information. No. What? You were gathering control. Silence. She recovered quickly. I don't appreciate that tone. And I don't appreciate people planning my financial future without inviting me. She ended the call 2 minutes later. That weekend, Ethan and I attended a charity fundraiser hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. Nothing fancy. Round tables, rubber chicken, bad coffee, the usual. Halfway through dinner, an older businessman named Harold Jensen introduced himself. He owned a chain of commercial kitchen supply stores. I've heard good things about your company, he told Ethan. You ever considered expanding into neighboring states? We're growing slowly. Harold smiled. Slow isn't a bad strategy. They talked for 20 minutes. Equipment, hiring, service routes. Eventually, Harold handed Ethan a business card. If you ever decide to grow faster, he said, give me a call. We thanked him and thought nothing more about it. Until Monday morning, Harold called. His company wanted to outsource maintenance across 3 states. It would nearly double Ethan's annual revenue. The opportunity was enormous. Also terrifying. We spent 2 weeks reviewing numbers, running projections, talking to accountants, speaking with attorneys. Not once did we tell my parents. Not because we were hiding something, because it wasn't anyone else's decision. Eventually, we accepted, carefully, one region at a time. No reckless expansion, no unnecessary debt, just steady growth. Exactly the way Ethan preferred. 2 months later, someone leaked the news. I still don't know who. Maybe someone from the chamber. Maybe a supplier. Maybe one of Ethan's employees mentioned it to the wrong person. However it happened, my mother found out. She called before breakfast. I hear congratulations are in order. For what? Oh, don't be modest. She sounded almost cheerful. 3 states now. I glanced at Ethan across the kitchen. He slowly shook his head. We're expanding. Wonderful. Then, so, how much will the company be worth now? There it was. Not, how are you handling the workload? Not, are you excited? Not, are you getting enough rest? Straight to value. I answered honestly. I have no idea. You must. I don't. You could estimate. We're not interested in estimating. She laughed. You've become very private. No, I replied quietly. We become married. A week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was another document. This one wasn't laminated. It was professionally typed. Across the top, family succession discussion. 8 pages. I sat at the dining room table, reading every line. The document suggested future inheritance planning, shared investment opportunities, family property ownership, joint vacation homes, long-term financial cooperation. Every paragraph somehow led to the same conclusion. Our money should eventually become family money, not because anyone needed help, because, according to my mother, strong families build collective wealth rather than individual security. I reached the last page. There was a signature line, not just for me, for Ethan too. Attached with a paperclip was a yellow sticky note. Let's discuss Sunday after church. Love, Mom. I didn't even notice Ethan walk into the room. He read my face first, then the document. He turned pages slowly. When he finished, he didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Finally, he smiled, not happily, knowingly. I think, he said, we're finally seeing what all the rules were really about. I looked up. What do you mean? He tapped the first page. The wedding rules. The notebook. Trevor. The bank accounts. The financial planner. This. He stacked every document neatly into one pile. They aren't separate conversations. I looked down at the papers. He was right. Every single one pointed in exactly the same direction. Access, influence, authority, not over our relationship, over everything we might someday build. Then Ethan noticed something I had completely missed. At the bottom of page 6, in tiny print, was a sentence that made both of us stop breathing, prepared using recommendations from Harlan and Pierce Family Wealth Advisors. Neither of us had ever heard that name before, but Ethan looked at it for several seconds, then quietly said, I think it's time we find out who they've been planning this with. And for the first time, this no longer felt like a family disagreement. It felt like something much bigger was waiting just beneath the surface. Ethan didn't call Harlan and Pierce immediately. He did what he always did when something felt important. He gathered facts first. The next morning, he called the attorney who had helped us review the expansion contracts. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She'd spent nearly 20 years working with privately owned businesses, and she had a habit I appreciated immediately. She asked questions before offering opinions. After scanning the documents I'd emailed her, Rebecca called back within an hour. The paperwork itself isn't illegal, she said, but the pattern concerns me. What pattern? The same objective appears in every document. She paused. Influence over future assets. Then she asked a question that stopped me. Has anyone besides your parents ever contacted Ethan directly about the business? I looked at Ethan. His expression changed. Actually, he said slowly, yes, He disappeared into his office and returned carrying a business card. Harold Jensen, the businessman we'd met at the charity dinner. Rebecca grew quiet. Did he introduce you to Harlan and Pierce? No, but he recommended a financial advisor. My stomach tightened. Rebecca sighed, softly. I'd suggest you verify whether everyone involved understands the same story. That weekend, we agreed to attend my parents' family succession discussion. Not to argue, to listen. People often explain themselves best when they think you've already agreed. Sunday afternoon, we arrived exactly on time. The dining room table was neatly arranged. Folders, coffee, fresh pens, even name cards. My mother had planned this like a board meeting. She smiled warmly. I'm so glad you came. We sat. My father remained unusually quiet. Across the table sat another man I'd never met. Gray suit, polished shoes, leather portfolio. Mother introduced him proudly. This is Martin Pierce. One half of Harlan and Pierce. Everything suddenly made sense. Martin smiled professionally. My role today is simply to explain how successful families preserve wealth across generations. Successful families. There was that phrase again. For nearly 30 minutes, he spoke about trusts, governance structures, tax efficiency, family councils, and advisory boards. It sounded impressive until he reached the final page. Our recommendation, he said, is that major financial decisions receive review from a family advisory committee. I looked at the proposed committee. My parents, Martin, eventually our future children. Ethan quietly closed the folder. No, Martin blinked. I'm sorry, we're not creating a committee. Mother leaned forward. Ethan, you're interrupting. No, he looked directly at Martin. I have one question. Martin smiled confidently. Of course. Who hired you? A pause. Your mother requested a consultation. And who are you legally representing today? Another pause. Technically, your parents. Ethan nodded once. Thank you. Then he stood. So this meeting was never about helping us. No one answered. It was about convincing us. Silence filled the room. Finally, my mother lost her composure. We're trying to protect everything you're building. Ethan's voice stayed calm. From what? From mistakes. We're allowed to make our own. You don't understand how much money changes people. No. He looked at her steadily. I understand that it already has. She froze. He continued. You didn't believe in my business when it barely paid the mortgage. You believe in it now, not because I've changed, because the numbers have. Nobody moved. My father stared at the table. Martin quietly began sliding his papers back into his briefcase. He looked like a man who suddenly wished he'd scheduled a different appointment. Then I reached into my bag. One by one, I placed every document on the table. The laminated wedding rules, the notebook, the financial planner's recommendations, the succession proposal. I lined them up by date, oldest to newest, exactly the way I'd organize shipping records at work. You see this? I said quietly. For 2 years, I thought these were separate conversations. I touched the first page. They weren't. I touched the last. They were one plan. My mother's eyes moved across the documents. For the first time, she had nothing to say, not because she changed her mind, because she'd run out of explanations. I stood. I'm grateful you raised me. I'll always be grateful. But gratitude isn't ownership, and marriage isn't a family promotion. I slipped my hand into Ethan's. We're leaving. This time. No one tried to stop us. A month later, my father asked to meet me alone. We sat in the same diner where we'd shared coffee before. He didn't make excuses. He didn't defend my mother. He simply looked tired. I should have spoken years ago. I nodded. Yes. I kept believing things would calm down. They never do. No, they usually grow. He smiled sadly. I know that now. We didn't solve everything that afternoon. Some things can't be repaired in one conversation. But for the first time in my life, my father accepted responsibility without asking someone else to carry it. That mattered. My relationship with my mother never returned to what it had been. Because the truth is, there wasn't much to return to. We spoke on birthdays, major holidays, occasional phone calls, always politely, always with clear boundaries. She eventually stopped sending documents, stopped offering rules, stopped asking about our bank accounts, not because she suddenly agreed with our choices, because she'd finally learned they weren't hers to make. 3 years later, Ethan's company had grown into one of the most respected commercial service businesses in our region. Not the biggest, not the richest, just trusted. People often asked us what the secret had been. Hard work, good timing, smart decisions, those things mattered. But they weren't the foundation. The foundation had been much smaller. One quiet word spoken across a dining room table before our wedding. No, not shouted, not angry, just clear. Sometimes people think love is proven by how much you tolerate. I've learned something different. Healthy love isn't afraid of boundaries. The people who truly love you may not always like your no, but they will learn to respect it. The people who only loved having influence over you usually disappear the moment that influence ends. If this story meant something to you, remember this. You don't owe anyone control in exchange for love. Boundaries are not punishment. They're the doors that protect the life you and your family are building together. And sometimes the most loving word a husband or wife can say isn't yes. It's a calm, respectful no.